Imagine sharing one earth but two menus, one roasting bison, the other drinking cacao. When Spanish traders crossed the Andes in 1532, they couldn't believe both were called native. Even the spices told separate stories of fire and frost, mountain and plain. Today, we uncover 10 surprising ways North and South natives ate differently, and what it reveals about us.
The Maya created the most elaborate calendar system of any culture.
Number 10. North hunted bison, South domesticated llamas and alpacas for meat, wool, and transport. Archaeologists say over 30 million bison once moved across North America. Imagine that, an ocean of muscle and dust stretching from Texas to Canada. For tribes like the Lakota, Blackfoot, and Crow, those herds were everything. The hunt decided who lived through the winter and who starved. One mistake could mean losing the herd or your life. A single bison gave almost a ton of meat. Hunters dried the flesh into pemmican, a mix of fat and berries that lasted months without rotting. Children helped scrape hides for clothing. Women boiled hooves into glue. The bones became tools. The stomach turned into water bags. Every part had a purpose. In 1830, an observer named George Catlin wrote that a good hunter could drop a bull with one shot using a handmade bow. He called it the noblest act of life on the plains. The South tells a completely different story. The Andes didn't have bison. They had altitude, frost, and thin air. Around 4000 BCE, people began taming llamas and alpacas. Llamas carried loads across mountains higher than the Rockies. Alpacas provided soft fiber and steady meat. Inca engineers even bred them selectively for stronger coats at colder heights. By the 1400s, the Inca Empire relied on more than 10 million camelids to move goods, feed soldiers, and clothe royalty. Spanish chroniclers later called their wool the gold of the Andes. Both worlds turned animals into lifelines. But one chased survival through movement, while the other built it through control. One trusted instinct, the other trusted design. And then came the next divide, the fields that fed them. Corn in the north, potatoes in the south. Two crops that built civilizations, and one that nearly caused a rebellion centuries later. Why? Number 9. North built diets around corn, squash, beans. South dominated with potatoes, quinoa, cassava. Every civilization stands on a handful of plants. In North America, 3 of them ruled everything: corn, beans, and squash. Archaeologists call them the 3 sisters. They grew together in one mound: corn for height, beans for protein, squash for shade. It was ancient teamwork. By 1000 BCE, tribes across the Mississippi Valley farmed this trio like clockwork. They didn't use iron or wheels, but they built food systems strong enough to feed thousands. Corn started as a wild grass in Mexico. Farmers spent generations selecting bigger kernels until it became the golden crop we know. By the time Europeans arrived, corn had spread from Canada to Chile. Some villages are stored enough to last through 3 winters. The Iroquois even used it in trade and diplomacy. One historian wrote that whoever controlled corn controlled peace. Then the South rewrote the script. High in the Andes, farmers discovered plants that could survive where nothing else grew. Potatoes became their lifeline. Over 4,000 types existed: purple, red, yellow, each adapted to a specific altitude. Quinoa gave protein. Cassava handled dry soil. Together, they made farming possible above 12,000 feet, where nights froze solid and oxygen thinned. Spanish explorers in the 1500s called the potato a miracle root. Within a century, it spread to Europe and doubled population growth. Both sides fed empires, but in different ways. The North built harmony between crops and soil. The South built endurance against nature. Food became science long before that word meant anything. Yet, while one side grew sweetness from forests, The other learned to brew it from fire and fermentation. How did simple sugars turn into cultural identity and spark rituals the Spanish tried to erase? Number 8. North sweetened with maple and berries, South fermented sugars from maize, agave, and yucca. Sugar tells you everything about a culture, how it lives, celebrates, and remembers. In the North, sweetness came straight from the land. Long before Europeans refined sugarcane, native tribes in what's now Canada and the Great Lakes region were boiling sap from maple trees. Archaeologists date maple sugar making back over 1,200 years. Tribes like the Anishinaabe called it Iskigami-Zigan, the sugar camp. Every spring, families moved into the forest with wooden buckets and stone kettles. They boiled sap down into cakes of hard sugar that lasted all year. It fueled hunters, fed travelers, and flavored feasts. Alongside it came berries, blueberries, cranberries, and black chokeberries. They sweetened pemmican and were traded hundreds of miles away. In 1634, a French missionary wrote that the Ojibwe carried dried berries as gold of the forest. Sugar was more than food. It was mobility, health, and ritual. Down south, sweetness meant something else. It meant transformation. The people of Mesoamerica learned to ferment sugars from maize, agave, and yucca. Around 1000 BCE, they brewed drinks that carried both flavor and spirit. Pulque, made from agave, became sacred to the Aztecs. Thick, foamy, slightly sour. Only nobles and priests could drink it during ceremonies. In the Andes, people turned maize into chicha, a fermented beer that bonded communities. They even used it as a tax. Archaeologists found remains of a brewery at Cerro Baul, Peru, that could produce nearly 1,000 liters at a time, 600 years before the first European alehouse. Both sides found sweetness in survival. The North gathered it from trees and berries. The South turned it into living chemistry. And that chemistry led to another divide: how they saved what they made. When food faced time, one smoked it, the other froze it. But how did one civilization master freeze-drying a millennium early? Number 7. North stored food by drying and smoking. South invented freeze-drying 1,000 years earlier. Every culture had to face the same enemy: time. Food spoiled fast, winters were long, and survival depended on how well you could beat decay. In the North, tribes turned preservation into an art. Hunters smoked meat for days over slow fires, sometimes using willow or hickory to add flavor. Dried salmon could last an entire season. The Inuit in Alaska dried fish on racks high above the ground so bears couldn't reach them. Plains tribes made pemmican, a mix of dried bison, fat, and berries that stayed good for months and could feed warriors on the move. By 1200 CE, long before refrigeration, the North had built a system that could store food through any season. Families buried dried meat in hide bags, sealed with fat, and marked the spots for future hunts. Early explorers like Lewis and Clark wrote in 1805 that pemmican preserved the life of the traveler. It was the first field ration of the Americas. Then comes the twist. The South took preservation even further. In the Andes, high altitude became a tool. Temperatures swung from blazing days to freezing nights, and people learned to use that shift. They left potatoes outside overnight, let the frost pull out moisture, then stomped them in the morning to release the water. After several cycles, the potatoes turned into chuño, light, dry, and nearly immortal. Archaeologists have found chuño stored in Incan warehouses over 1,000 years old, still recognizable. Some call it the first true freeze-drying method in history. So while the North fought time with smoke and air, the South used the sky itself. And the next step in their story moves from survival to architecture, when food no longer just grew on land, but climbed mountains. How did they turn cliffs into farmland that could feed an empire? Number 6. North farmed forests and rivers. South carved terraces into mountains like giant green steps. Every landscape forced people to think differently about food. In the north, nature gave plenty, if you knew where to look. Forests, lakes, and rivers were full of life. The Haudenosaunee, also called the Iroquois, farmed along riverbanks, rich in silt. They mixed agriculture with hunting and fishing, rotating crops to keep soil healthy. Along the Pacific Northwest, tribes like the Tlingit and Haida built wooden traps that caught salmon by the thousands. In 1791, explorer George Vancouver wrote that their fishing systems could feed an army. They treated rivers like farms and forests like gardens. Further east, people built entire food networks around water. The Huron planted corn near lakes to use natural irrigation. Beavers changed waterways, and tribes learned to follow their engineering. It was balanced, a system that worked with nature instead of fighting it. Meanwhile, down in the Andes, there was no easy water, no flat ground. The mountains rose like walls, and people solved that problem with genius. Starting around 500 BCE, they began carving terraces, wide steps cut into slopes held by stone walls. Each level trapped rain and soil, creating microclimates where crops could survive. At Machu Picchu alone, there are more than 3,000 terraces. Some reach heights of 8,000 feet, still standing after 500 years of storms and earthquakes. Modern engineers say Inca terraces prevented floods and fed millions. Spanish chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega wrote in 1609, "The mountains gave fruit as if they were plains." So one side farmed what nature offered, and the other rebuilt nature from scratch. Both created abundance through adaptation. But what happened when abundance met movement? When food had to travel, by water in one world, by stone roads in another? How did distance become the next test of survival? Number 5. North used canoes to harvest wild rice. South engineered irrigation to feed empires. In the north, water wasn't just for travel, it was food. Every fall, the Ojibwe paddled through calm lakes filled with tall, golden stalks of wild rice. They called it manuman, meaning the good seed. Each canoe moved slowly, 2 people working together. One paddled while the other bent the stalks and tapped the grains into the boat. It looked peaceful, but every kernel mattered. A single family could harvest up to 300 pounds in a season. Wild rice became more than a crop. It became an identity. Elders still say their ancestors followed the rice to where it grows on water. Other tribes did the same along rivers from Minnesota to Ontario. They built light birch canoes that glided through reeds and shallow streams. The rice was dried over small fires, winnowed in baskets, and stored for winter. When French traders arrived in the 1600s, they described it as the grain that never dies. It fueled explorers and native nations alike, carried by waterways that connected thousands of miles of trade. The South turned the same idea into architecture. Instead of gathering water, they built paths for it. The Nazca and later the Inca engineered irrigation networks that stunned even the Spanish. By 1000 CE, farmers in Peru had channels cut through solid rock, carrying meltwater from the Andes to dry valleys. Some canals stretched for 20 miles. Archaeologists discovered one near Kawachi that still works after 1,500 years. Through this, entire cities bloomed in deserts where rain barely fell. So both worlds trusted water, but one floated on it while the other mastered its direction. And soon, those differences reached the fire itself, the way they cooked. One buried meat under earth, the other boiled stone in flame. But which method changed food forever? Number 4. North cooked in earth pits and smoked meat. South mastered stone boiling and chilly fire. Cooking was more than survival. It was community. Across North America, food came from the fire under the ground. Tribes like the Pawnee, Hopi, and Cherokee used earth ovens for everything: deer, fish, squash, corn. They dug deep pits, lined them with hot stones, wrapped food in leaves, and buried it for hours. The result was smoky, tender, and filled with flavor. Archaeologists found pit sites dating back 4,000 years in Kansas and Nebraska. Some were the size of a small car. Smoking changed everything. It made meat last longer and added flavor unlike anything Europeans had tasted. Pacific tribes smoked salmon over alder wood for days, sealing it in cedar boxes. Hunters in the Great Plains used long racks built from willow branches, hanging strips of bison over slow fires. The smell carried across the prairie. In 1806, explorer Meriwether Lewis wrote that smoked bison could travel the continent without decay. Meanwhile, in the South, cooking turned scientific. The Inca and their neighbors used stone boiling, heating round rocks in a fire until they glowed red, then dropping them into clay pots filled with soup or maize. It was fast and surprisingly efficient. Some stones reached over 600 degrees. The Moche civilization in Peru left murals showing this process in detail, dated around 500 CE. They seasoned their food with wild chili peppers and herbs long before chili reached Asia, or Europe. One Spanish chronicler wrote in 1532 that Inca stews burn the tongue and bless the heart. So one culture buried flavor, while the other boiled it to life. Both mastered fire, but for completely different reasons: taste versus altitude, patience versus speed. And then came the next leap: drinks that healed or changed the mind. What happens when medicine turns into ritual? Number 3. North brewed medicinal teas, South fermented ceremonial alcohol like chicha and pulque. Across the forests of the North, medicine grew in plain sight. Leaves, roots, and bark were the pharmacy. Long before modern hospitals, tribes treated illness with teas that balanced body and spirit. The Cherokee brewed willow bark for pain, the same compound that would later inspire aspirin in 1897. The Ojibwe steeped cedar and sumac to fight infection. In winter, they drank pine needle tea for vitamin C, something Arctic explorers later copied to avoid scurvy. These teas carried stories too. A healer never worked alone. Entire families gathered around the fire as herbs simmered in clay pots. The air smelled sharp, almost electric. Some mixtures treated fever, others cleared the mind. The Lakota called medicine wungspe, sacred knowledge. Every sip meant survival, earned through generations of trial and observation. When settlers arrived, they traded metal tools for plant cures, writing recipes in field journals that scientists still quote today. The South brewed something far stronger. In Mesoamerica and the Andes, fermentation became a ceremony. The Aztecs made pulque from agave sap, thick and foamy like liquid bread. Only priests and warriors could drink it during rituals. Breaking that rule meant punishment. Spanish chroniclers noted offenders were executed for drinking it without reason. Meanwhile, in the Andes, women prepared chicha by chewing maize to release enzymes, then letting it ferment in clay jars for days. It powered Inca festivals, sacrifices, and even political deals. Archaeologists uncovered a brewery at Cerro Baul, Peru, that could produce over 1,800 liters in a single batch. Both drinks carried meaning. One healed, the other transformed. And that sense of exchange, medicine, trade, belief, soon moved beyond cups and jars. When food began to travel between nations, it crossed rivers and mountains. But who moved it faster, the paddles or the roads? Number 2. North traded food by waterways. South traded food along 25,000-mile mountain road networks. Trade held the continent together long before borders. In the North, rivers were the highways. The Mississippi, Missouri, and St. Lawrence carried everything: corn, fish, maple sugar, furs, and stories. Tribes built sleek birch canoes that weighed less than 60 pounds but could carry half a ton, A good paddler could cover 70 miles a day. That speed made trade possible across distances that Europeans struggled to believe. At every bend of the river stood a meeting point. Cahokia, near modern St. Louis, held markets as early as 1000 CE. Archaeologists have found shells from the Gulf of Mexico, copper from the Great Lakes, and obsidian from the Rockies. Proof that these networks spanned the entire continent. Food moved with ritual, corn symbolized trust, tobacco sealed deals, and dried fish traveled farther than most traders ever would. In 1673, Jesuit explorer Jacques Marquette called the river a road that leads to every nation. Far to the south, the Inca built something even more astonishing. Their trade system stretched across 25,000 miles of stone-paved roads through cliffs, deserts, and glaciers. Llamas carried food, cloth, and salt in caravans guarded by runners called shaskis. These runners could deliver fresh fish from the coast to the mountains in less than 3 days, a distance of nearly 300 miles. Every 20 miles stood a tambos, a roadside inn stocked with dried potatoes, maize, and chicha for travelers. Spanish explorers arriving in the 1530s compared the Inca road to the Roman Empire, but longer and higher. So one world floated trade across rivers, the other carved it into stone. Both moved food faster than logic should allow, and soon that motion met rhythm when time itself bent around farming. How did some cultures follow the seasons, while others made the seasons follow them? Number 1. North-shaped food around seasons. South-shaped seasons around food with agricultural science. In the north, the calendar came from the sky. Every season carried its own taste. Spring meant maple sap and fresh fish. Summer brought berries, squash, and corn. Autumn was the time for hunts and harvests. Winter meant dried meat and stored grain. Life moved with the earth's rhythm, not against it. Tribes like the Iroquois and Sioux planned every move around the moon cycles. The green corn moon, the harvest moon, the hunger moon. Each one marked a rule of survival. Farmers kept time by instinct. They felt when the soil warmed, when the birds changed their calls. By the 1400s, the Mississippian people built entire towns designed around food timing. At Cahokia, near modern Illinois, they raised giant wooden posts aligned with the solstices. Archaeologists call it Woodhenge. It worked like a calendar, tracking sunlight to signal when to plant corn or store meat. The fields became clocks. Meanwhile, the South rewrote the calendar. The Andes turned agriculture into science. The Inca didn't wait for seasons. They designed them. Using hundreds of microclimates carved into terraces, they created growing zones from desert to snowline. Crops ripened in rotation, so food arrived year-round. Scientists found an Inca agricultural lab at More, Peru, circular terraces descending 500 feet deep. Each ring had its own temperature and humidity. Modern studies show they may have tested over 200 varieties of potatoes and maize. The Inca calendar ran on astronomy and mathematics. Priests tracked stars like Sirius and the Pleiades to predict rainfall. When drought threatened, they sacrificed llamas and offered chicha to the gods, early climate control through ritual and faith. Before you go, every dish hides a story, and every flavor remembers a world that almost vanished. Click the next video on your screen right now before it disappears. Another secret's waiting.